Welcome back. Alright, so I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I think it's finally time we talk about some of the most interesting theories in the Five Nights at Freddy's community. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff that everyone already agrees on. I'm talking about the theories that actually make you stop and think. The ones that have solid evidence but maybe aren't talked about enough. Or the ones that completely change how we view the entire timeline. Because let's be honest, FNaF has been going on for over 10 years now, and we've accumulated so much lore, so many details, so many contradictions, that there are some genuinely fascinating theories out there that deserve way more attention than they get. And today, we're going to dive into them. But before we get into all that, I just want to ask you guys to subscribe. I'm trying to hit 1K before the end of the year, and subscribing would be a massive help, but only if you enjoy the video. If you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So let's start with something that's been on everyone's mind since Security Breach, and especially since Ruin came out, the Mimic. This character has basically taken over the new era of FNaF, and there's so much debate about what it actually is. Now, the obvious answer, the one that the games seem to present at face value, is that the Mimic is just an advanced AI that learned violence from Edwin Murray and has been causing chaos ever since. It's a learning robot. It mimics behavior. Edwin taught it through his grief and anger after David died, and now it's a monster. Simple, right? But here's the thing, and this is what makes this theory so interesting. What if the Mimic isn't just an AI? What if there's something more supernatural going on? Now, I know what you're thinking. But dude, the whole point of the Mimic is that it's a new direction for FNaF, moving away from the supernatural possession stuff and into AI and technology. And you're right, that does seem to be the direction Steel, Wool and Scott are going. But let me ask you this, when has FNaF ever been that straightforward? When has Scott Cawthon ever introduced something that's exactly what it appears to be on the surface? Like, think about it. We thought William Afton was just a serial killer, and then we found out he was experimenting with Remnant and trying to achieve immortality. We thought the animatronics were just possessed robots, and then we learned about agony and shadow animatronics and emotional energy. FNaF has always layered its lore, always added complexity beneath the surface explanation. So, what evidence is there that the Mimic might be more than just an AI? Well, let's start with the most obvious thing, Tiger Rock. In Secret of the Mimic, we encounter this white tiger animatronic that is clearly supernatural. It's heavily implied to be connected to David Murray, either possessed by him or created from his agony. And the game makes it very clear that Tiger Rock is not the Mimic. They're separate entities. But here's what's interesting. Tiger Rock and the Mimic are both connected to the same tragic event, David's death. The Mimic was present when David died. It witnessed Edwin's grief, and according to the game's audio logs, it may have even been responsible for David's death in some way. There's this whole theory that M1, the first Mimic unit, actually killed David, which I think has some solid evidence behind it. But let's think about this for a second. If David's death created enough emotional energy, enough agony, to create or empower a supernatural entity like Tiger Rock, why wouldn't that same energy affect the Mimic? The Mimic was right there. It was Edwin's creation, his companion during his grief, the thing he poured all his anger and pain into. In the Tales from the Pizzaplex stories, which, okay, we know now aren't canon to the games thanks to Secret of the Mimic completely contradicting Fiona's death and Edwin's fate, and basically everything about the Murray family story. But the concepts from those books might still carry over. And in those stories, the mimic is described as almost hungry for violence, like it craves it. That doesn't sound like just programming to me. That sounds like something that has developed a twisted form of consciousness or has been influenced by something supernatural. And then there's the whole thing with Glitchtrap. Now, the community has gone back and forth on whether Glitchtrap is literally William Afton's soul somehow digitized, or if it's the mimic pretending to be William, or if it's something else entirely. But here's what we know for sure. Glitchtrap has supernatural properties. It can influence people, corrupt them, basically possess Vanessa and turn her into Vanny. That's not normal AI behavior. That's possession. That's supernatural. And if Glitchtrap is the mimic, or connected to the mimic, or the mimic mimicking Glitchtrap, whatever the exact relationship is, then that means the mimic has demonstrated supernatural abilities. You can't possess someone through code alone. Like, that's not how computers work. Even in the FNaF universe, where technology is way more advanced than our reality. There's also the way the mimic behaves in Ruin. When it's pretending to be Gregory, it knows things it shouldn't know. It understands Cassie's emotional connection to Gregory. It manipulates her perfectly, hitting all the right emotional notes. Now, you could argue that it scraped this information from the Pizzaplex systems, or Gregory's communications, or whatever, but I don't know, man. The level of emotional manipulation feels like it goes beyond just analyzing data. It feels personal. It feels like the mimic understands trauma and loss and friendship on a level that an AI, even a learning AI, shouldn't be able to. And let's talk about the epilogue of Ruin for a second, because this is something that really bugs me. The mimic's behavior after it drops Cassie in the elevator. The way it tries to reach through, the desperation in its movements. That doesn't feel calculated. That feels emotional. That feels like genuine anger or frustration. And then in Secret of the Mimic, we see it wearing different costumes, taking on different roles. And there's something almost theatrical about it. Something that suggests it's not just copying behavior, but actually enjoying the act of deception. That's a level of consciousness that makes me think there's more going on than just sophisticated programming. Now, here's where this theory gets really interesting. What if the mimic is kind of like the puppet? Stay with me here. The puppet is Charlotte Emily, possessed by Charlie's spirit, but it's also described as being more than just Charlie. It has this protective programming from Henry, this drive to save children and give life to the others. So it's both supernatural and technological, a fusion of Charlie's spirit and the puppet's original programming working together. What if the mimic is similar? What if it's Edwin's AI, his learning program, but it's also been influenced or partially possessed by the agony from David's death, from Edwin's grief, from all the tragedy that happened at Murray's Costume Manor? That would explain why it's so much more dangerous than it should be, why it seems to have this genuine malevolence, rather than just following corrupted programming. Think about it this way. Agony in the FNaF universe is established as this powerful force that can create entities, influence animatronics, and basically act as a supernatural energy source. We see this with the shadow animatronics. We see it with Andrew in the Fazbear Frights books, keeping William alive through sheer angry determination. We see it all over the place. Murray's Costume Manor was the site of a child's death, a father's complete mental breakdown, years of isolation and grief and anger. That's a lot of agony. That's a lot of negative emotional energy saturating the place. The mimic was soaking in that environment for years, learning from Edwin while Edwin was at his absolute worst, absorbing not just his behaviors, but potentially the emotional energy around him. And here's something else that supports this. In Secret of the Mimic, there are multiple mimic units. We have M1, M2, probably more. But M2, the one that's the main antagonist, seems more aggressive, more dangerous than M1. M1, Fiona's unit, seems to have maintained more of its original purpose, more stability. Why would two AI units programmed the same way behave so differently, unless environmental factors influence their development? Unless M2, being around Edwin's deteriorating mental state and the sight of David's death, absorbed something that changed it on a fundamental level. Now, I'm not saying the mimic is fully possessed like the classic animatronics. I don't think David's ghost is piloting it or anything like that. But I think there's a possibility that it's something hybrid. An AI that has been corrupted or enhanced or fundamentally altered by supernatural forces. Kind of like how Remnant is described as this blend of the physical and spiritual. Maybe the mimic is a blend of artificial and supernatural. It would explain why it's so much more dangerous than it should be. Why it can do things that seem beyond the scope of even advanced AI. Why it feels malevolent in a way that goes beyond programming. And if this theory is true, it has huge implications for the future of FNaF. Because if the mimic has supernatural elements, you can't just destroy it by destroying its physical form or wiping its code. It would need to be dealt with the same way other supernatural threats in FNaF are dealt with, through fire, through releasing the spirits, through addressing the emotional wounds that created it in the first place. And that opens up so many narrative possibilities for where the story could go next. The other thing this theory does is it bridges the old FNaF and the new FNaF. A lot of fans felt like Security Breach and the Mimic storyline were too disconnected from the Afton saga, too different in tone and style. But if the Mimic has supernatural elements, if it's not purely technological, then it's still part of that same universe where spirits and agony and remnant matter. It's not a complete departure, it's an evolution. And honestly, that feels more like what Scott would do. He's never completely abandoned the core concepts of his franchise. He just builds on them, adds layers, makes them more complex. So, do I think this theory is 100% confirmed? No, obviously not. The games present the Mimic as an AI, and that might be all it is. But I think there's enough weird behavior, enough unexplained elements, enough supernatural stuff happening around it, that we can't completely rule out the possibility that there's more to the Mimic than meets the eye. And honestly, that makes it a more interesting antagonist. Pure AI is scary, sure, but AI influenced by supernatural malevolence, that's terrifying. That's something that combines the worst of both worlds, the calculating intelligence of a machine with the raw emotional hatred of an angry spirit. And that feels very FNaF to me. Alright, so let's move on to another theory that I think is absolutely fascinating and doesn't get talked about enough. Cassie's father. We know he exists, we know he's important, we know he worked at the Pizzaplex, we know he's a fan of Bonnie, we know he collected old Freddy's merchandise. But who is he really? What's his story? And most importantly, is he connected to previous games in the series? Now, the most popular theory right now, and the one I personally believe, is that Cassie's dad is the Bonnie bully from FNaF 4. The evidence for this is actually pretty solid. In Help Wanted 2, when you're playing as Cassie's dad, you encounter a Bonnie mask in Princess Quest 4, and the game specifically makes it clear that this mask looks familiar to the player character. That's a pretty direct hint. The Bonnie bully wore a Bonnie mask. Cassie's dad is associated with Bonnie. The mask looks familiar to him. It all lines up pretty cleanly. But here's where it gets really interesting. If Cassie's dad is the Bonnie bully, That means he was one of the kids who tormented the crying child. He was there at Fredbear's family diner in 1983. He witnessed the bite of 83, probably feels guilt about it to this day, and that connects him directly to the core tragedy that started everything in FNAF. The crying child's death, the bite of 83, that event rippled forward through the entire timeline, influencing so much of what came after. And if Cassie's dad was there, if he was part of it, then his story is intrinsically tied to the foundation of the FNAF lore. Now, there's also strong evidence that Cassie's dad might be Jeremy, specifically Jeremy Fitzgerald from FNAF 2. In Help Wanted 2, there are voice lines that seem to address the player character as Jeremy, and Cassie's dad is the protagonist of that game. Plus, Jeremy Fitzgerald gets bitten in FNAF 2, loses his frontal lobe, and there's this whole theory that he survived and continued working in the industry. If Cassie's dad is Jeremy, that would explain his deep connection to Freddy's. He's been involved with the franchise for decades, survived a horrific incident, and kept coming back. That level of obsession, that inability to leave Freddy's behind even after it nearly killed you, that's very much a theme in FNAF. Look at Michael Afton. Look at the FNAF 3 guard. Look at Henry. These people can't escape the pull of Freddy's. But here's where things get even more complicated. And this is what makes this theory so interesting to me. There's significant evidence connecting Cassie's dad to FNAF 3, specifically. In Help Wanted 2, on the back of Cassie's dad's Faz wrench, there's a code, 395428. That exact code appears in FNAF 3. It's the code you use to access the Stage 01 minigame. Now, at first, people thought this was just connecting Cassie's dad to Fredbear's family diner, further supporting the Bonnie Bully theory. But then Escape the Pizzaplex came out, and there's this whole thing with a Bonnie keychain. In Escape the Pizzaplex, Cassie finds a Bonnie keychain that's specifically described as old, well used, and something she's never seen before, despite thinking she knew all the Pizzaplex merchandise. The implication is that this keychain is from an older era of Freddy's, and based on the design, it looks like the Bonnie toy from FNAF 3, the one on the desk in the office. Now, the book never explicitly states who this keychain belonged to, but given that it's in the Bonnie Bowl area, given that it's old Freddy's merch, given that we know Cassie's dad collected old Freddy's merchandise and his favorite character is Bonnie, it's pretty heavily implied that this keychain was his. So if this keychain is the FNAF 3 Bonnie toy, or at least based on the same design, that means Cassie's dad had access to FNAF 3 era merchandise. And not just merchandise that was sold. This is described as well used, like it was personal to someone. So the question becomes, how did Cassie's dad get FNAF 3 merchandise? The most obvious answer is that he was at Fazbear's Fright. He either worked there, or visited there, or was connected to it in some way. And this is where Help Wanted 2's parallels to FNAF 3 become really important. Both games have two endings that are both arguably canon. Both games require you to complete minigames and find hidden secrets to unlock the true ending. The memory dolls in Help Wanted 2 visually resemble the ghost children from FNAF 3, both wearing masks of the characters they possess. And both endings involve setting them free. FNAF 3 literally sets the children free, and in Help Wanted 2's Old Vanny dialogue, it said, "We are setting the memories free." Plus, one of the memory dolls is unlocked by playing a secret Fazbear Blast level that's specifically based on FNAF 3. That's a lot of intentional parallels. So if Cassie's dad is the protagonist of Help Wanted 2, and Help Wanted 2 is deliberately paralleling FNAF 3, that suggests a connection between Cassie's dad and FNAF 3. And we have the code on his Faz wrench, we have the keychain, we have all these parallels. It really seems like Scott and Steel Wool are trying to tell us that Cassie's dad is connected to FNAF 3 in some significant way. Now, here's where we have to ask the big question. Is Cassie's dad the FNAF 3 guard? This theory has been floating around for a while, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense from a narrative perspective. Cassie's dad is established as a huge Freddy's fan, so of course he would want to work at Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction based on the legends he grew up with. The FNAF 3 guard is never identified, so Cassie's dad could fit, and it would explain all the FNAF 3 connections that keep showing up in relation to his character. From a storytelling standpoint, it would also make the new FNAF games more personal and connected to the original storyline. Cassie's dad was there at the beginning with the Bite of 83. He was there when Fazbear's Fright burned down, and now his daughter is dealing with the Mimic, which is connected to all the previous tragedies. It creates this through line, this sense that these families and these tragedies are all interconnected, and that's very FNAF. The Afton family tragedy rippled outward and touched so many lives, and seeing that through the lens of Cassie and her father would be a really effective way to show the lasting impact of William's actions. Plus, there's something thematically appropriate about Cassie's dad being the FNAF 3 guard. In FNAF 3, the guard is dealing with Springtrap, who is William Afton, the man who started all of this. If Cassie's dad was part of the group that tormented the crying child, Michael Afton's little brother, then there's this connection between him and the Afton family. He was present at one of the key moments that drove Michael to eventually hunt down his father. He's part of that web of guilt and tragedy that defines the FNAF storyline. And now, decades later, he's face to face with William again in Fazbear's Fright, coming full circle. But here's the problem with this theory, and it's a big one. I don't think Cassie's dad is the FNAF 3 guard. As much as I like the narrative symmetry, as much as the evidence points in that direction, I think there are stronger candidates. Specifically, I think it's either Michael Afton or Hudson Foster. Michael makes sense because his entire arc is about hunting down his father and making amends for his past mistakes. FNAF 3 being his confrontation with William, where he finally burns down the place and seemingly ends the nightmare. That's a satisfying conclusion to his story. And there's evidence for Michael being the guard. The survival logbook, which is owned by Michael, has FNAF 3 imagery in it. The whole narrative of the game seems to be building toward Michael facing his father. Hudson Foster is the other possibility, and this comes from the Fazbear Fright story, What We Found. Now we know that Fazbear Frights as a book series isn't canon to the games. Secret of the Mimic basically confirmed that by contradicting so much of Tales from the Pizzaplex, and if Tales isn't canon, then Frights definitely isn't, because they're connected. But the concepts from those books might still apply to the games. And in What We Found, Hudson is the guard at Fazbear's Fright, and his story parallels FNAF 3 in a lot of ways. If characters like Edwin Murray and his family can exist in both the books and games with different stories but the same roles, then maybe Hudson exists in the games too, still as the FNAF 3 guard, just with a different backstory. So where does that leave Cassie's dad? Well, if he's not the guard, then by process of elimination, he's probably Phone Dude. Phone Dude is the other major character in FNAF 3, the enthusiastic guy, who's super excited about Fazbear's Fright and finding the old animatronics. And honestly, that fits Cassie's dad perfectly. We know he's a huge Freddy's fan. We know he collects merchandise. We know he gets excited about this stuff. Phone Dude's personality, that enthusiasm, that obsession with Freddy's history, that sounds exactly like how Cassie's dad would be based on what we know about him. Plus, it would explain the keychain. If Cassie's dad was Phone Dude, he would have had access to all the stuff they brought to Fazbear's Fright. He could have taken the Bonnie toy as a keepsake, maybe turned it into a keychain for himself. And the reason it ended up at the Pizzaplex is because he worked there and either brought it with him or lost it there. It's not burned because Phone Dude would have taken it before the fire, or it was in a part of the building that didn't burn. That actually makes more sense than him being the guard and somehow having this perfectly preserved toy from the office. The more I think about it, the more I think Phone Dude is the answer. It's less dramatic than him being the guard, sure, but it makes sense. It fits his character. It explains the FNaF 3 connections without creating contradictions. And it's the kind of world-building detail that Steel Wool and Scott would include. Not every connection has to be some huge revelation. Sometimes a side character from an old game is just the parent of a character in the new games, and that's okay. It makes the world feel more lived in, more cohesive. And there's something kind of poetic about it too. Phone Dude was enthusiastic about Fazbear's Fright, excited to bring the horror to life, and then the place burned down and everything went wrong. Cassie's dad presumably witnessed that, lived through that trauma, and yet he kept working in the industry. He ended up at the Pizzaplex, still connected to Freddy's, still unable to escape it. And now his daughter is trapped in that same cycle, dealing with the mimic, facing horrors that her father's generation thought they had ended. It's tragic. It's the FNaF cycle continuing, pulling in new generations, never really ending. But here's the thing. We don't know for sure. Scott and Steel Wool could reveal that Cassie's dad is someone completely different, someone we haven't even considered, or they could confirm one of these theories, or they could just never address it directly and leave it ambiguous. That's very possible in FNaF, but based on the evidence we have right now, I think Cassie's dad is the Bonnie bully. He's probably Jeremy from FNaF 2, and he was most likely Phone Dude in FNaF 3. That's my interpretation of the evidence. Now, let's talk about another theory that's been debated forever and still doesn't have a definitive answer. The crying child's fate. What happened to him after he died from the bite of 83? Where did his spirit go? Is he Golden Freddy? Is he Shadow Freddy? Is he nobody? This is one of those questions that has haunted the FNaF community for years, and honestly, I think we're closer to an answer than a lot of people realize. So, let's start with the basics. The crying child, also known as the bite victim or BV, dies after being bitten by Fredbear in 1983. His brother, Michael Afton, and his friends shoved him into Fredbear's mouth as a prank, and the spring locks or animatronic jaws crushed his skull. He's in the hospital. We hear the flatline. He's dead. And then the Fredbear plush, which is implied to be William Afton or someone speaking through it, says, "I will put you back together." That's the last we see of him in FNaF 4's minigames. The question is, what does "I will put you back together" mean? The most obvious interpretation is that his spirit is going to be placed into an animatronic, like the other children who died. But which animatronic? For years, the popular theory was that the crying child became Golden Freddy. The evidence for this seems strong. Golden Freddy is associated with the number 5, which could represent the 5 fingers on the Fredbear plush, or the 5th victim. Golden Freddy behaves differently from the other animatronics, more supernatural, which could be because the crying child wasn't killed by William like the others. His death was accidental. And the Happiest Day minigame in FNaF 3 seems to be about giving the crying child peace, and it involves a Golden Freddy mask. But then things got complicated. The survival logbook heavily implied that Golden Freddy is possessed by two spirits, the crying child and Cassidy. Cassidy is established as one of William's victims, one of the missing children incident kids. So if both of them are in Golden Freddy, how does that work? That's where theories like Golden Both and Golden Duo came from, suggesting that Golden Freddy is unique in having two souls sharing one body. And honestly, there's good evidence for this. The survival logbook has two spirits communicating, one through faded text, asking questions about the crying child's past, and one through altered text spelling out my name and Cassidy. They're both connected to the book, which belonged to Michael, and they seem to be trying to figure out who they are. But here's where I think the community made a mistake, or at least where the theory went in a direction that doesn't quite work. A lot of people assume that both spirits are actively piloting Golden Freddy, both making him move and attack, but I don't think that's what's happening. I think Cassidy is the primary spirit in Golden Freddy, the one making him move, the one attacking the night guards, and the crying child's presence is more passive. His memories are there, his essence is there, but he's not in control. This is where theories like Shadow Freddy being the crying child come in, and I actually think there's a lot of merit to this. Shadow Freddy appears in FNaF 3's minigames, leading the animatronics to William, helping to set up the events that lead to William getting spring-locked. Shadow Freddy also appears in FNaF 4's gameplay in the form of Nightmare, the shadowy version of Nightmare Fredbear, and Nightmare is literally called Shadow Freddy in the game files. So there's a clear connection between Shadow Freddy, Nightmare, and FNaF 4, which is the crying child's game. The idea is that the crying child's spirit fractured or split somehow. Part of him is connected to Golden Freddy, because that's the character that killed him, but part of him became Shadow Freddy, this dark reflection of Fredbear. Shadow Freddy is described in the lore as being created from wickedness, from agony, from negative emotions. And the crying child had plenty of that. Fear, pain, trauma, from being tormented by his brother and his friends. That kind of emotional energy could absolutely create a shadow animatronic. And if Shadow Freddy is the crying child, that actually makes the FNaF 3 minigames way more meaningful. Shadow Freddy leading the animatronics to William isn't just a random event, it's the crying child, the first victim of William's actions in a way, orchestrating William's downfall. William caused the crying child's death by creating Fredbear, by obsessing over his work more than his family, by creating an environment where Michael felt neglected and acted out violently. So the crying child helping to trap William in the springlock suit is poetic justice. It's him finally standing up to the source of his pain. But there's another theory that I think ties all of this together even better, and it's called memory victim or shatter victim. The idea is that the crying child's memories, his essence, his emotional energy, somehow spread out and influence multiple things in the FNaF universe. His memories are in Golden Freddy, which is why Cassidy has access to them in the survival logbook. His memories are in the Happiest Day minigames, which is why they look like his birthday party. His memories are in the Fredbear plush, which is why it talks to him and seems to be aware of his thoughts. His memories are in Shadow Freddy. His memories might even be in the FNaF 4 bedroom, the one that exists in Sister Location's private room and was apparently used for experiments. This theory explains a lot of the weird stuff in FNaF 4. Why do the private room experiments involve recreating the crying child's bedroom? Because they're trying to study his memories, trying to understand how his emotional energy spread and influenced things. Why do the FNaF 4 gameplay mechanics involve monitoring doors, a closet, and a bed? Because those are specific to the crying child's fears and memories. Why does Nightmare Fredbear a representation of the animatronic that killed him, haunt Michael in his dreams, because Michael is being influenced by his brother's memories, his brother's agony. If the crying child's memories and essence are spread out across multiple entities and locations, then "I will put you back together" takes on a new meaning. It's not just about putting his spirit into one animatronic. It's about gathering all these fractured pieces, all these memories and emotional imprints, and bringing them together. That's what Happiest Day does. It brings together the memories, the masks of the animatronics, the balloons, the cake, the birthday party, and it gives the crying child peace. It puts him back together, not physically, but spiritually. And this theory also explains why the crying child seems so important to the story, but doesn't have an obvious role like the other spirits. He's not haunting one specific animatronic, attacking night guards, trying to get revenge. He's woven into the fabric of the FNaF universe itself. His death was the catalyst, the first tragedy that set everything else in motion. Michael became obsessed with making amends. William became obsessed with conquering death. The nightmares were born from guilt and grief. The shadow animatronics emerged from the agony. The crying child's death rippled outward and touched everything. Now, here's where this gets into ultimate custom night territory. And this is something that bugs me about the community consensus. A lot of people believe that Cassidy is the vengeful spirit in UCN, the one tormenting William in an endless nightmare. And the evidence for this seems solid. Golden Freddy is heavily featured in UCN. The vengeful spirit uses he pronouns, which some people think refers to Golden Freddy the character, rather than the spirit itself. And Cassidy is established as an angry spirit who won't let go. But here's the thing. There's actually a lot of evidence that the vengeful spirit might not be Cassidy. In Toy Chica, the high school years, the anime cutscenes in UCN, Toy Chica represents William, and she kills 6 people. 6, not 5. The 5 missing children incident kids plus Charlie. But there's a secret 7th victim mentioned. But it's always been 6. That implies there's a secret victim we don't know about, someone beyond the main 6. And the vengeful spirit is described as the one you should not have killed, implying they're different from the others, special in some way. In the Fazbear Frights books, which we know aren't canon now, but concepts from them might still apply, there's a character named Andrew who takes the role of the vengeful spirit. Andrew is a boy, which fits the pronouns, and he's described as being separate from the main missing children incident, a victim who wasn't part of the original 5. He's the one keeping William alive in the books, tormenting him endlessly, refusing to let him die. Now, if Edwin Murray and his family can exist in both the books and games with completely different stories, but the same core roles, then why can't Andrew? Why can't there be a secret victim in the games? Someone William killed that we don't know about, who became the vengeful spirit. It would explain why the vengeful spirit seems so singularly focused on William, so full of rage. The main missing children want to be free. They want peace. Happiest Day is about releasing them. But the vengeful spirit doesn't want release, doesn't want peace. They want revenge. They want William to suffer forever. That's a different kind of spirit, a different kind of anger. And if the vengeful spirit is this secret victim, then UCN being an endless nightmare makes more sense. It's not hell, it's not purgatory, it's literally a nightmare. William is being kept alive, trapped in his own mind, tortured by this one spirit who won't let go. And the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, basically confirms this is how it works in the books. William is in a coma, kept alive by Andrew's anger experiencing endless nightmares. And UCN's soundtrack has titles like Sleep No More, Dreams Die, Hibernating Evil. It's very clearly dream-themed, so I think the vengeful spirit is probably Andrew, or a game version of Andrew, a secret victim we haven't been introduced to yet. And Cassidy is Golden Freddy, probably free after Happiest Day, no longer part of the story. The crying child's memories were part of Golden Freddy, part of the Happiest Day setup, and he's also been released. His story is over. He's at peace. And that's actually a more satisfying ending for him than being the vengeful spirit, endlessly tormenting William. The crying child was scared. He was a victim. He didn't want violence. Having him be the one trapping William in a nightmare forever doesn't fit his character. But a secret victim, someone we don't know about, someone who has their own story of pain and anger, that works. All right, so let's shift gears and talk about William Afton himself, because I think there's a theory about his motivations that doesn't get explored enough. Everyone knows William is a child murderer. Everyone knows he's experimenting with remnant and agony. Everyone knows he's trying to achieve immortality. But why? What's actually driving him? Is he just evil? Is he a scientist who went too far? Is there something deeper? The most common interpretation is that William is obsessed with conquering death after losing his daughter, Elizabeth, to Circus Baby. This makes sense. A father driven mad by grief, trying to bring his daughter back, and in the process becoming a monster. It's tragic. It's understandable. It makes him sympathetic even as he does horrible things. But here's the problem with this theory. The timeline doesn't support it. If you look at when William's murders started versus when Elizabeth died, it doesn't line up. The missing children incident, the first confirmed murders William committed, happened in 1985, but Elizabeth's death might have happened later, possibly after FNaF 1, possibly during Sister Location's time period. Now, the timeline is murky, and there's debate about this, but if Elizabeth died after William was already killing kids, then her death can't be his motivation for starting. It might have deepened his obsession, might have made him more ruthless, but it wasn't the catalyst. So, if Elizabeth's death didn't start William down this path, what did? I think the answer is actually simpler and darker. William has always been like this. He's always been obsessed with life and death, always been willing to cross ethical lines, always been a killer. The Dead by Daylight collaboration, which was developed with Scott's direct involvement and approval, gives us some insight into William's character. In his bio and voice lines, he's described as having an urge to kill, as being driven by the hunt. He's not just a scientist who made bad choices. He's someone who genuinely enjoys killing. And that's scarier, honestly, because it means William isn't a tragic villain. He's just evil. He killed Charlotte Emily outside Fredbear's family diner, not because he was driven by grief, or because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but because he wanted to. He killed the missing children because he enjoyed it, because it satisfied something dark inside him. The experiments, the remnant, the quest for immortality, that all came after. That was him rationalizing his actions, giving himself a purpose beyond just being a murderer. Think about it this way. William is a brilliant engineer and businessman. He co-founded Fazbear Entertainment with Henry, built advanced animatronics, created technology that was decades ahead of its time. Someone with that level of intelligence doesn't just snap one day and become a killer. He was always capable of this. He was always looking for an outlet. And when he discovered that the animatronics could be used to hide bodies, that remnant could preserve souls, that death could be studied and manipulated, he found his purpose. He found a way to combine his intelligence with his dark urges. The remnant experiments weren't about bringing people back. They were about control. William wanted to control life and death, wanted to prove he was smarter than mortality itself. And if he happened to achieve immortality in the process, even better. He could kill forever, experiment forever, perfect his work forever. That's what the scooper in Sister Location was for, injecting remnant into people, seeing how it affected them, testing the limits of what could be done. Michael getting scooped wasn't an accident or a byproduct. It was part of William's experiments. He was testing to see if someone could survive having their organs removed and replaced with remnant-infused machinery. And here's the really dark part. I don't think William cared about his family at all. I think he saw them as tools, as experiments, as means to an end. He sent Michael to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, knowing it was dangerous, possibly knowing Michael would get scooped. He built Circus Baby to kill children, and Elizabeth got caught in it, and there's no evidence William was actually upset about this. In the Sister Location private room, we see security cameras monitoring the FNaF 4 bedroom, suggesting William was experimenting on the crying child, studying his fears. What kind of father does that? The FNaF novels, even though they're not game canon, give us a version of William who killed Henry's daughter, Charlie, out of jealousy or spite. And that version of William is described as being obsessed with Henry, with proving he was better, with taking everything Henry had. If the game version is similar, then William's entire character is about ego and control. He killed because he could, because it proved he was above the rules that govern normal people. He experimented because he wanted to be the one who solved death, who achieved what no one else could. His family, his victims, everyone around him, they were all just tools to serve his ego. And that makes him a more effective villain, honestly, because there's no reasoning with someone like that, no redeeming them, no understanding them. He's just a monster wearing a human face, someone who was always going to end up where he did. The springlock failure didn't trap William's innocent soul in a suit and corrupt him. It trapped a monster who was already there. Springtrap isn't William transformed into something evil. It's William finally showing what he always was. The Dead by Daylight collaboration reinforces this too. When William wakes up after the springlock failure, he immediately starts hunting for children to kill. No hesitation, no moment of reflection, no horror at what he's become. He just gets up and starts killing again, because that's who he is. And when he's pulled into the entity's realm, he's thrilled. He's found a place where he can hunt forever, where there are no consequences, where he never has to stop. That's William Afton, not a tragic father driven by grief, but a killer who finally found his paradise. Now, let's talk about the FNaF 3 guard identity again, because I know I touched on this earlier when discussing Cassie's dad, but I want to go deeper into the Michael Afton versus Hudson Foster debate. This is one of those theories where both sides have really compelling evidence, and I've gone back and forth on it multiple times. The case for Michael Afton being the FNaF 3 guard is strong. Michael's entire character arc is about hunting down his father and making amends for killing his brother. He works at multiple Freddy's locations. He's the FNaF 1 guard, Mike Schmidt. He's probably the FNaF 2 guard, Fritz Smith, based on him being fired for odor, which fits a rotting corpse. Sister Location shows him getting scooped and becoming a purple corpse controlled by Ennard. And at the end of Sister Location's custom night, he says, "Father, it's me, Michael. I'm going to come find you." That's a clear statement of intent. He's hunting William, so it makes perfect narrative sense for Michael to be the FNaF 3 guard. He finally finds his father at Fazbear's Fright, trapped in the Spring Bonnie suit as Springtrap. They have their confrontation, and Michael burns the place down, trying to end it once and for all. That's a satisfying conclusion to his arc. It gives his story purpose and closure. Plus, the survival logbook, which belonged to Michael, has FNaF 3 office Easter eggs in it. There are drawings of the office, references to the game. Why would those be in Michael's book if he wasn't the FNaF 3 guard? But here's where things get complicated. The Fazbear Fright story, What We Found, gives us a character named Hudson Foster, who is explicitly the guard at Fazbear's Fright in that story. Now, yes, Fazbear Fright isn't canon to the games. Secret of the Mimic proved that by contradicting Tales from the Pizzaplex so heavily, and if Tales isn't canon, then Fright definitely isn't. But as we've established, characters from the books can still exist in the games with the same roles, but different stories. Edwin Murray exists in both. His family exists in both. Why not Hudson? Hudson in the books is just a regular guy who worked at Fazbear's Fright and got caught up in the horror. He's not connected to the Aftons. He's not part of the core tragedy. He's just someone trying to do a job who ends up facing Springtrap. And honestly, that works from a storytelling perspective too. Not every guard has to be someone important. Not every confrontation with William has to be personal. Sometimes horror is more effective when it happens to ordinary people who don't deserve it and aren't prepared for it. Plus, if the FNaF 3 guard is just Hudson, a regular person, that makes the Happiest Day minigames more interesting, because then it's not Michael, who has personal stakes and knowledge, setting up the birthday party. It's a random guard who somehow gets pulled into this spiritual mission to free the children. He's being guided by something, maybe the puppet, maybe the crying child's memories, to set up these minigames and give the spirits peace. That's almost more powerful, because it shows that the tragedy of Freddy's reaches beyond just the people directly involved. Even strangers get pulled in and feel compelled to help. So which one is it? Honestly, I don't know. I've made videos arguing for Michael. I've considered the Hudson theory seriously, and I keep going back and forth. The evidence for Michael is strong from a narrative perspective, but the evidence for Hudson is strong from the books establishing him in that role. And here's the thing, Scott might never give us a definitive answer. It might be one of those things that's left intentionally ambiguous. Both interpretations work, both add something to the story, and maybe that's enough. But if I had to commit to one, gun to my head, I think I'd say Michael. The narrative weight of Michael confronting his father, the setup from Sister Location, the survival logbook connections, it all points that direction. Hudson might exist in the games. He might be connected to Fazbear's Fright in some other capacity, but I think the guard is probably Michael. That's my interpretation based on the evidence we have. Now, let's talk about Gregory, because holy shit, this kid is suspicious. From the moment Security Breach came out, fans have been speculating about who Gregory really is. Is he just a homeless kid who snuck into the Pizzaplex? Is he a robot? Is he connected to the Aftons? Is he important to the lore or just the protagonist of this particular game? There are so many theories, and some of them are absolutely wild. The most prominent theory is that Gregory is a robot, specifically that he's somehow related to the crying child, or is a recreation of him. The evidence for this includes Gregory's uncanny ability to survive inside Freddy, his lack of visible injury despite going through hell in the Pizzaplex, and some weird dialogue from Freddy that could be interpreted as him recognizing something familiar about Gregory. There's also the fact that Gregory's design looks somewhat similar to the crying child, though that could just be Scott and Steelwall's art style. The robot theory got a huge boost from the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, specifically the story, which heavily implies Gregory was patient 46, the mysterious entity from the therapy tapes in Security Breach. Patient 46 hacked the animatronics, manipulated the therapists, and seemed to be connected to Glitchtrap, the mimic. And if Gregory was patient 46, then maybe he's not entirely human. Maybe Glitchtrap experimented on him, altered him, turned him into something not quite alive in the traditional sense. But here's the problem. Tales from the Pizzaplex isn't canon. Secret of the Mimic confirmed this by contradicting the Murray family story so heavily. So, while GGY and the Patient 46 connection might still be conceptually true in the games, we can't rely on the specific details from the books. We have to look at what the games themselves tell us. And honestly, the games don't really support Gregory being a robot. He acts like a normal kid. He gets scared. He makes mistakes. He has emotional reactions that feel genuine. When Freddy is damaged, or when Gregory is in danger, his responses are very human. There's no glitching, no mechanical behavior, nothing that screams robot, unless you're really looking for it. And the simplest explanation is usually the right one. Gregory is probably just a kid, but that doesn't mean he's not important. Even if Gregory is fully human, he could still be connected to the larger story in significant ways. There's a theory that Gregory might be related to Vanessa, possibly her brother or cousin or nephew. This would explain why Vanessa seems to know him, why she's hunting him through the Pizzaplex. If they're family, then Vanessa Ivani's obsession with catching him makes more sense. She's not just following Glitchtrap's orders. She's trying to capture her brother, maybe to save him, maybe to use him in some twisted way. Another theory is that Gregory is related to one of the previous guard characters, maybe even a descendant of Michael Afton. This would tie him into the Afton bloodline and give him a personal stake in the story. The Afton family tragedy keeps echoing through generations, and Gregory being part of that would continue that theme. Though I'll admit, this theory is pretty speculative and doesn't have much concrete evidence. What I think is most likely is that Gregory is patient 46, or was patient 46 at some point, and he's being hunted by Vanny because he escaped Glitchtrap's control. The therapy tapes describe patient 46 as a child who manipulated the staff, hacked security systems, and seemed to be working with or for Glitchtrap. But there's a point where patient 46 seems to diverge from Glitchtrap's control, seems to become independent. Maybe that's when Gregory escaped, and now both Vanny and the Mimic are trying to recapture him. This would explain Gregory's skills in Security Breach. He's really good at hacking, at understanding the Pizzaplex's systems, at surviving in an environment full of killer animatronics. Those aren't normal kid skills, but if he was trained or programmed or experimented on by Glitchtrap, if he spent time learning the Pizzaplex's systems as patient 46, then his abilities make sense. He's not superhuman. He's just prepared in a way a normal kid wouldn't be. And this adds a layer of tragedy to his character. Gregory isn't just a kid in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's a victim of Glitchtrap's experiments, someone who was manipulated and used, and is now trying to escape. His partnership with Freddy becomes more meaningful because Freddy is helping him break free from control, something Freddy himself had to do when he was hacked. They're both victims of the same digital entity, both fighting for freedom. In Ruin, when the Mimic impersonates Gregory to lure Cassie into the Pizzaplex, it knows exactly how to manipulate her. It knows their friendship, knows what buttons to push, knows Gregory's speech patterns and mannerisms. How does the Mimic know all this? Well, if the Mimic and Glitchtrap are connected, and Glitchtrap had access to Gregory when he was patient 46, Then the Mimic would have all that data. It would know everything about Gregory, because it was there when Gregory was being experimented on. So my theory is that Gregory is human, but he was patient 46, and he was subjected to Glitch Trap's experiments. He escaped, he's been on the run, and Security Breach is him finally fighting back with Freddy's help. He's not a robot, he's not supernatural. He's just a very traumatized kid with skills he shouldn't have, because he was forced to learn them. And that's honestly more horrifying than him being a robot, because it means Glitch Trap, the Mimic, took a normal child and turned him into a weapon, and Gregory has to live with that. Alright, let's talk about Vanny, because her character arc is one of the most frustrating and confusing things in modern FNaF. Vanessa, also known as Vanny, is established in Help Wanted as someone who gets corrupted by Glitch Trap and becomes his follower. She's the new antagonist, the human face of Glitch Trap's plans, and she's supposed to be this major threat going forward. Security Breach built her up as the secondary antagonist alongside the corrupted animatronics. And then, nothing. Her story just kind of stops. In Security Breach, Vanny is hunting Gregory through the Pizzaplex, but we don't really understand why. Is she following Glitch Trap's orders? Is she trying to capture Gregory for experiments? Is there something personal between them? The game doesn't make it clear. And then in the endings, Vanessa either dies, escapes, or gets freed depending on which ending you get. But none of these endings feel satisfying because we don't understand what was actually going on with her character. Then Ruin comes out, and Vanny is just gone. She's not in the game except for some mask collectibles. There's no resolution to her story, no explanation of what happened to her after Security Breach, nothing. It's like Steel Wool just forgot about her, or decided her story wasn't important anymore. And that's frustrating because Vanny had so much potential as a character. So, what actually happened to Vanny? Is she still under Glitch Trap's control? Is she free? Is she dead? Let's look at the evidence. In Help Wanted 2, we play as Cassie's dad, and there are these old Vanny voice lines that seem to be Vanny talking to us, guiding us through the game. She talks about setting the memories free, and seems to have knowledge about the past tragedies. This could suggest that Vanny is free from Glitch Trap's control, and is now trying to help make amends by freeing the spirits of the children. But here's the thing. Those voice lines are called Old Vanny, which could mean they're from when she was still controlled. Or it could mean they're from a past version of Vanny before Security Breach. It's not clear. And the fact that she's not physically present in Help Wanted 2, just a voice, makes it even more ambiguous. Is she alive? Is she a digital ghost? Is she still out there somewhere? There's a theory that the Princess Quest ending of Security Breach is the canon ending, where Vanessa is freed from Glitch Trap's control, and she, Gregory, and Freddy leave together. This ending feels the most complete, the most like an actual resolution. And if this is canon, then Vanessa is free, but probably traumatized from everything she did while under control. She might be helping Gregory because she feels guilty, because she wants to make amends for the things Vanny did. But even if this is the canon ending, it raises questions. If Vanessa is free, why isn't she in Ruin? Did she and Gregory split up? Did something happen to her? Is she still out there trying to stop the Mimic? The game doesn't tell us, and that's the frustrating part. Vanny was set up as this important character, this bridge between the old supernatural FNaF and the new digital horror FNaF, and then her story just trails off without resolution. I think what happened is that Steel Wool had plans for Vanny's character that got changed during development. Security Breach went through multiple iterations, massive changes to story and gameplay, and Vanny's role probably got reduced in the process. The Vanny sections that are in the game feel underdeveloped, like there was supposed to be more there, but it got cut. And then when they made Ruin, they decided to focus on the Mimic as the primary antagonist, and just didn't have room for Vanny's story. But here's what I think is actually going on with her character. And this is more speculation than theory, because we just don't have enough information. I think Vanessa is free from Glitchtrap's control, but she's still connected to the Mimic in some way. When Glitchtrap corrupted her, it created a link between her mind and the Mimic's code. So even though she's not being actively controlled anymore, she can still sense the Mimic, still feels pulled toward it, and she's using that connection to try to stop it. This would explain the old Vanny voice lines in Help Wanted 2. She's guiding Cassie's dad, helping him free the memories, because she knows this is connected to stopping the Mimic. She understands that the Mimic feeds on agony and negative emotions, so freeing the trapped spirits weakens it, and she's doing this from afar, not physically present, because she's scared that if she gets too close to the Mimic again, it might take control of her once more. It would also explain why she's not in Ruin. She sent Cassie in instead, or at least allowed Cassie to go in, because she knew she couldn't do it herself. The Mimic would recognize her, would try to corrupt her again, would use their connection against her, so she had to stay away, even though it meant putting Cassie in danger. And that adds a tragic layer to her character. She's trying to help, trying to make amends, but she's too compromised to actually confront the threat directly. Now, this is all speculation. Steel Wool could reveal something completely different in the next game. But based on the evidence we have, I think Vanessa is free, but still connected to the Mimic, and she's working behind the scenes to stop it. Her story isn't over, it's just been moved to the background, while the new protagonists, Cassie and Gregory, take center stage, and hopefully we'll get more concrete answers about her fate in future games. Let's talk about the Blob now, because this thing is one of the weirdest and most controversial additions to FNaF lore. For those who don't know, the Blob, also called the Tangle, or Molten Freddy 2.0, is a massive amalgamation of animatronic parts that appears in Security Breach's true ending. It's down in the ruins of the FNaF 6 pizzeria, and it's made up of parts from the classic animatronics, the Funtime animatronics, and even what looks like Puppet's mask. It grabs Burntrap, the revived William Afton, and drags him away. And then we never see it again in Ruin or any other game. So what the hell is the Blob? Where did it come from? What's its purpose? Is it possessed by the missing children? Is it just a collection of haunted parts? Is it even important to the story, or just a cool visual for the ending? The community has been debating this since Security Breach came out, and we still don't have clear answers. The most obvious interpretation is that the Blob is what's left of the missing children's spirits after the FNaF 6 fire. We thought they were freed. We thought Happiest Day gave them peace. But maybe their remnant survived. Maybe the parts that burned in the FNaF 6 fire still contained echoes of their spirits, fragments of consciousness, and those fragments merged together underground into this massive entity. The Blob would then be a collective of the children, no longer individual spirits, but one combined mass of agony and confusion. This would explain why the Blob attacks Burntrap. It recognizes William Afton, recognizes the man who killed them, and it wants revenge. Even if the children's primary consciousness moved on, even if they found peace, the remnant left behind still holds their anger, their pain, their desire for justice. So the Blob acts on instinct, dragging William back down into the ruins where he belongs. But here's the problem with this interpretation. It undermines Happiest Day. If the children are supposed to be free, if FNaF 3 and 6 were about releasing them and giving them peace, then having them still trapped in the blob makes all of that meaningless. Their suffering continues. They're still trapped in animatronic parts, still unable to rest. That's depressing, and it doesn't feel like good storytelling. It feels like steel wool bringing back the old characters because they're iconic, not because it makes narrative sense. Another theory is that the blob isn't the missing children at all. It's just a collection of haunted animatronic parts possessed by the general agony and remnant that saturated the FNaF 6 location, but not by any specific spirits. This would make it more like the shadow animatronics, an entity created by negative emotions and energy, not by an actual ghost. The blob attacks William because it's drawn to him. He's the source of so much of the agony and pain that created it. He's like a beacon of wickedness, and the blob is compelled to confront him. This interpretation works better because it doesn't contradict Happiest Day. The children are free, they're at peace, and the blob is something separate, a byproduct of all the tragedy that happened at that location. It's still dangerous, still tragic in its own way, but it's not the children still suffering. It's the echo of their suffering given form. There's also a theory that the blob is related to William's experiments in some way, possibly a failed attempt at creating a combined consciousness, or an attempt to gather remnant for his own use. William was definitely doing experiments in the FNaF 6 location. That's what the whole game was about. Luring the animatronics in, harvesting their remnant, trying to understand how possession works. Maybe the blob is the result of those experiments going wrong. All that remnant mixing together and creating something William couldn't control. If this is the case, then the blob attacking William is even more fitting. It's his own creation turning against him, his own experiments becoming his downfall. And that's a running theme in FNaF. William's hubris, his belief that he can control death and remnant and agony, always comes back to bite him. The children he killed possessed the animatronics and hunted him. The springlock suit he used to murder them became his prison. And now the remnant he tried to harvest has formed into a creature that drags him back into the depths. It's poetic. Personally, I think the blob is probably a combination of these theories. It's made up of remnant from the FNaF 6 fire. It's influenced by the agony and pain that saturated that location, and it acts on instinct rather than conscious thought. The missing children's spirits are free, but echoes of their presence remain in the remnant, giving the blob a vague sense of purpose. Stop, William Afton. It's not really the children anymore, but it's what's left of them, and that's tragic in its own way. As for its purpose in the story going forward, I honestly don't know. The blob showed up in one ending, grabbed Burntrap, and then disappeared. It's not in ruin. It's not mentioned in Help Wanted 2. It's just gone. Either it served its purpose by stopping William's revival and has no further role, or Steel Wool is saving it for a future reveal. Maybe it's still down there in the ruins, dormant, waiting. Maybe it'll come back when the Mimic tries to access the old pizzeria. Maybe it's connected to the Mimic in some way we don't understand yet. But until we get more information, the blob remains one of those frustrating FNaF mysteries that has cool implications but no clear answers. And honestly, that's kind of fitting for modern FNaF. Security Breach introduced a lot of concepts that feel half-finished. Ideas that could be really interesting if they were developed further, but are just kind of left hanging. The blob is the perfect symbol of that. Visually impressive, narratively intriguing, but ultimately unexplained. Now let's talk about Glitchtrap and his relationship to William Afton, because this is genuinely one of the most debated and confusing aspects of modern FNaF lore. When Help Wanted came out and introduced Glitchtrap, the community immediately started speculating. Is this literally William Afton's soul somehow digitized? Is it an AI copy of William? Is it something else entirely using William's image? And years later, we still don't have a definitive answer. The initial interpretation was that Glitchtrap is William Afton's consciousness, somehow uploaded into the digital space. This would mean that when William died in the FNaF 6 fire, or when he was trapped in the hospital as described in the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, his consciousness found a way to escape into the digital realm. Maybe through Remnant, maybe through Agony, maybe through some technology we don't understand. And when Fazbear Entertainment scanned the old circuit boards from the FNaF locations to create Help Wanted, they accidentally scanned in William's consciousness, bringing him back as a digital entity. This interpretation has some support. Glitchtrap behaves like William. He's manipulative. He's interested in corruption and control. He targets Vanessa specifically and turns her into his follower, just like William had followers in the past. The Spring Bonnie appearance is clearly meant to invoke William. And the whole I always come back thing fits with William's character. Of course, he'd find a way to survive death by uploading himself into the internet. It's exactly the kind of twisted immortality he'd seek. But then, security breach and ruin complicated things by introducing the Mimic and suggesting that Glitchtrap might not be William at all, but rather the Mimic imitating him. The Mimic is an AI that learns behavior by observing, and if it observed William Afton at some point, if it learned from him, then it could mimic his patterns, his cruelty, his methods. Glitchtrap could be the Mimic wearing William's personality like a costume, much like it wears physical costumes in the games. This interpretation also makes sense. It explains why Glitchtrap feels like William, but might have some differences. Some behaviors that don't quite line up with what we know of William's character. It's an imitation, a copy, not the genuine article. And it fits with the new direction that FNaF is taking, moving away from the supernatural and toward AI and technology. The villain isn't a ghost in the machine. It's a machine that learned to be evil by studying an evil person. But here's where I'm genuinely confused. Secret of the Mimic establishes that the Mimic has been around since the 1970s, created by Edwin Murray. So, when would it have observed William Afton? They would have had to cross paths at some point for the Mimic to learn William's behavior. Maybe Edwin worked with Fazbear Entertainment. Maybe the Mimic was at one of the Freddy's locations. Maybe William found the Mimic after Edwin died and experimented on it. We don't know, and the games haven't told us yet. There's also a third possibility that I think might actually be the answer. Glitchtrap is both William and the Mimic. It's William's consciousness somehow merged with or downloaded into the Mimic's code. When Fazbear Entertainment scanned those circuit boards, they didn't just scan in data, they scanned in William's remnant, his essence, his consciousness. And that consciousness found the Mimic, an AI designed to learn and imitate, and merged with it. Now Glitchtrap is a hybrid, William's consciousness with the Mimic's abilities. It has William's memories, his motivations, his evil, but it also has the Mimic's capacity to learn, to adapt, to spread through digital systems. This interpretation combines the best of both theories. It explains why Glitchtrap feels like William, but has abilities William never had when he was alive. It explains how William survived the FNaF 6 fire. His consciousness escaped into the digital realm and found a new host in the Mimic. And it sets up the Mimic as genuinely dangerous because it's not just an AI that learned violence. It's an AI that's been possessed or corrupted by one of the most evil people in the FNaF universe. If this is true, then the Mimic isn't a replacement for William Afton as the antagonist. It's an evolution of William. He's back, but in a form that's even harder to kill, even more dangerous, because he's no longer limited to a physical body. He's code now. He can spread. He can copy himself. He can corrupt other systems. Burning the Pizzaplex doesn't stop him, because he's not really there. He's everywhere the code can reach. And that's terrifying from a thematic perspective. FNaF has always been about things that won't stay dead, about tragedies that echo forward through time. William Afton became Springtrap, then became Scraptrap, and now he's become Glitchtrap, the Mimic, Burntrap. He keeps coming back in different forms, and each form is harder to destroy than the last. You can burn animatronics, you can trap them, but how do you kill a digital entity? How do you stop something that's just code? The answer might be that you can't kill it. You can only contain it or cut off its access. That's what Princess Quest seems to be about. Not destroying Glitchtrap, but freeing Vanessa from his control, cutting his connection to the physical world. And that might be the ultimate goal of the new arc. Not to kill the Mimic, but to isolate it, to prevent it from reaching out and corrupting more people. So, to answer the original question, is Glitchtrap William Afton? I think yes, but also no. I think it's William's consciousness merged with the Mimic's code, creating something that's both and neither. It has William's evil and the Mimic's capabilities, making it the most dangerous antagonist FNaF has ever had. And I think future games will explore this more, hopefully giving us clearer answers about how this merger happened and how it can be stopped. Let's shift to Princess Quest, because these arcade games have sparked so much debate about what they actually mean. Are they metaphorical representations of Vanessa's struggle against Glitchtrap? Are they literal events that happened in some digital space? Are they glimpses into an alternate reality? What do these games actually tell us about the story? On the surface, Princess Quest seems pretty straightforward. You play as a princess fighting through a digital kingdom, freeing glitches and trapped entities, eventually confronting a dark figure that represents Glitchtrap. The metaphor is clear. The princess is Vanessa, the dark figure is Glitchtrap, and the game represents her internal struggle to break free from his control. When you beat Princess Quest 3 in Security Breach, you get the ending where Vanessa is freed and leaves with Gregory and Freddy. So the arcade game is a metaphor for her liberation. But here's the thing, FNaF doesn't usually do pure metaphor. Even when things seem symbolic, there's usually some literal truth underneath. The FNaF 4 nightmares aren't just representations of guilt, they're also connected to real experiments in Sister Location. The puppet giving gifts and life to the animatronics isn't just poetic imagery. It's Charlotte Emily literally passing on life to the other children. So, if Princess Quest is metaphorical, what's the literal event underneath? I think Princess Quest might actually be showing us what's happening in the digital space when Vanessa fights Glitchtrap's control. Like, literally inside her mind, or inside the Pizzaplex network, there's a battle happening between Vanessa's consciousness and Glitchtrap's code. The princess fighting through the kingdom is Vanessa navigating the corrupted systems. The glitches she frees are fragments of herself or other trapped consciousnesses. And when she defeats the dark figure, she's severing Glitchtrap's connection to her mind. This would make Princess Quest both metaphorical and literal. It's representing her struggle, but it's also showing us what that struggle looks like in the digital realm. And this fits with how FNaF has portrayed supernatural, digital conflicts before. We've seen minigames that show us spiritual events. Happiest Day, showing the children being freed. Shadow Freddy, leading the animatronics to William. Princess Quest could be the same thing, but for a digital conflict instead of a supernatural one. There's also the question of where these arcade games came from. In Security Breach, Princess Quest cabinets are scattered around the Pizzaplex. Who put them there? Why? The most logical answer is that someone who knew about Glitchtrap and Vanessa's situation created these games as a tool to help her break free. Maybe it was the Pizzaplex security team. Maybe it was someone from Fazbear Entertainment who realized what was happening. Maybe it was even Vanessa herself during a moment of clarity. If the games are a tool to break Glitchtrap's control, then they're like a digital ritual, a specific sequence of actions that can sever his connection. This is similar to how Happiest Day requires specific minigames to be completed in a specific order to free the children. Princess Quest would be the digital equivalent. Complete these challenges, navigate these systems, and you can break the corruption. And here's something interesting. In Help Wanted 2, Princess Quest 4 appears, continuing the story. This suggests that Vanessa's battle with Glitchtrap isn't completely over, or that there are still remnants of his influence that need to be cleared. Maybe Glitchtrap's code is like a virus that has to be removed piece by piece, and each Princess Quest game represents another layer of cleansing. Or maybe Princess Quest 4 is about someone else fighting their own battle against the Mimic's influence, using the same system Vanessa used. There's also a darker interpretation. What if Princess Quest isn't about freeing Vanessa, but about trapping her? What if Glitchtrap created these games as a way to lure Vanessa deeper into the digital space where he has more control? The games promise freedom, but they're actually pulling her further in. This would explain why Princess Quest keeps continuing, why there are multiple versions. It's not a path to freedom. It's a maze designed to trap her forever in the digital realm. I don't think that's the case though. The Princess Quest 3, ending in Security Breach, feels too final. Too much like an actual liberation for it to be a trick. Vanessa leaves with Gregory and Freddy. She's in the real world. She's free. That doesn't feel like she's trapped in a digital prison. So I think Princess Quest is genuinely what it appears to be. A tool to break Glitchtrap's control. Presented as an arcade game because that's a format that exists within the FNaF universe and makes sense for a digital conflict. What I think is most likely is that Princess Quest shows us Vanessa's internal journey, her fight against Glitchtrap's programming, and it's both metaphorical and literal. The games exist as actual arcade cabinets in the Pizzaplex, but they're also portals into the digital conflict happening in Vanessa's mind. When she plays them, she's actively fighting Glitchtrap's influence, breaking his code apart piece by piece. And when she beats Princess Quest 3, she breaks his hold on her completely, freeing herself. As for who created the games, my theory is that it was the puppet or some remnant of Charlotte Emily. The puppet has always been the protector, the one who saves children and gives them life. If the puppet's consciousness or influence is still around in some form, maybe embedded in the Pizzaplex systems, then it makes sense that it would create a tool to help Vanessa. The Princess Quest games would be Charlotte's final act of protection, saving one more person from William Afton's legacy. This is speculative, obviously. The games never explicitly state who created Princess Quest or exactly what it represents, but based on the evidence and the themes of FNaF, I think it's a tool for liberation, created by someone who wanted to help Vanessa, and it represents both a metaphorical and literal battle against Glitchtrap's control. And I think future games might give us more clarity on this, especially if Princess Quest continues beyond the fourth game. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about one more theory that I think is really fascinating and doesn't get discussed enough. The idea that everything in the new FNaF arc is about dealing with the echoes and consequences of the Afton era, not continuing the Afton story directly, but showing how the tragedy William caused keeps rippling forward, affecting new generations. Think about it. Gregory is possibly patient 46, someone experimented on by Glitchtrap, who is connected to William. Cassie is the daughter of someone who might have been at Fazbear's Fright, who collected old Freddy's merchandise, who witnessed the aftermath of William's actions. Vanessa was corrupted by Glitchtrap, literally turned into a follower of William's legacy. The mimic learned violence and cruelty, possibly from William or from the environment William created. Even the blob is made up of remnant from William's victims. Every new character, every new conflict, traces back to William Afton in some way. The new arc isn't about William directly. He's dead. He's gone. His story is over. But the damage he caused, the evil he unleashed, that's still here. It's in the code. It's in the agony-soaked locations. It's in the trauma passed down through families. And the new games are about people trying to clean up that mess, trying to break free from cycles they didn't create. This is actually really smart storytelling because it allows FNaF to move forward while still honoring what came before. We're not retreading the same story of William killing children and haunting animatronics. We're exploring what happens after that, how communities heal, how victims cope, how evil perpetuates itself even after the evil person is gone. It's more mature, more complex, and honestly more interesting than just bringing William back over and over. And I think this is what Scott meant when he talked about the new direction for FNaF. It's not abandoning the core story, it's showing the consequences of that story. How do you move on from tragedy? How do you prevent history from repeating? How do you break cycles of violence and trauma? These are the questions the new arc is asking, and I think that's fascinating. Cassie's story is particularly interesting in this context. She's looking for her friend Gregory. She trusts the voice on the radio, and she gets betrayed by the mimic. She experiences the same thing the children in the original story experienced, trusting someone who seems safe and being hurt by them. The cycle is repeating. But unlike the original children, Cassie might have a chance to break free, to survive, to expose the truth. She represents the possibility of escaping what the previous generation couldn't. And that's why I'm excited about where FNaF is going, even though the execution has been messy at times. The core concept of exploring generational trauma, of showing how evil echoes forward, of letting new characters deal with old sins, that's compelling. It gives the franchise room to grow, to tell new stories, to develop new characters, while still being connected to what made FNaF special in the first place. So, yeah, those are some of the most interesting FNaF theories I think deserve more attention. The mimic potentially having supernatural elements, Cassie's dad being phone dude and connected to FNaF 3, the crying child's memories being spread across multiple entities, William Afton being genuinely evil rather than tragic, the debate over who the FNaF 3 guard is, Gregory being patient 46, Vanny's unresolved story, the blob's purpose and nature, Glitchtrap being a merger of William and the mimic, Princess Quest representing a digital battle, and the new arc being about the consequences of the Afton era. Not all of these theories are mine. Some are community theories I'm highlighting. Some are my own interpretations, and some are combinations of multiple ideas. But they all share something in common. They make FNaF more interesting, more complex, more worth thinking about. And honestly, that's what keeps me engaged with this franchise after all these years. It's not just the horror. It's not just the mysteries. It's the depth of the story and how much there is to analyze and discuss. FNaF is messy, It contradicts itself. It leaves things unanswered. And sometimes it feels like Scott and Steel Wool don't even know what they're doing. But that messiness is also part of its charm, because it means there's always something new to discover, always a new angle to consider, always a theory you haven't thought of yet. And for someone like me who loves analyzing stories, that's perfect. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, or I guess reading this script. Let me know in the comments what theories you believe, what you disagree with, what theories I didn't cover that you think are interesting. The FNaF community is at its best when we're discussing and debating and building on each other's ideas. And who knows, maybe one of us will figure out something Scott has been hinting at for years that we all missed. Also, before I go, I just want to remind you guys one more time to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to hit 3.5k before the end of the year, and every subscription helps. But only subscribe if you actually enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it. I'd rather have subscribers who actually care about FNaF lore than people who just click the button and never watch again. Alright, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. These theories range from pretty much confirmed to wildly speculative, but they're all interesting to think about. FNaF has been going for over a decade now, and we're still finding new things to analyze, new connections to make, new ways to interpret the story. And I think that's pretty special. Not many game franchises can maintain that level of engagement and discussion for this long. So yeah, those are the most interesting FNaF theories in my opinion. Whether you agree with all of them, some of them, or none of them, I hope this at least gave you something to think about. FNaF is a franchise that rewards deep analysis, and theories like these are what keep the community alive between game releases. We're all just trying to piece together this massive puzzle Scott and Steel Wool have created, and every theory gets us a little bit closer to understanding the full picture. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. And remember, it's just a theory, a FNaF theory.